Hello and welcome back to another Star Citizen video where I talk about ships and my personal thoughts on those. This time featuring the Drake Buccaneer. Basically we're going back to discussing fightercraft, which first we have a lot of in the game right now, and second because I do a lot of bounty hunting missions, I think I have a at least semi-decent grasp on things here. So I figured it should be another fighter this time and not like a bomber like we had last time. Anyway, the Drake Buccaneer. It's a very interesting take on the idea of a light fighter, just basically courtesy of Drake. And what you want in a light fighter, you know, is it should be fast, should be maneuverable. And then Drake said, sure, we'll take all that, but also we'll take guns. Lots and lots of guns. Like there's one here, there's one down below the wing, there's one on top of the main structure, and the same on the other side with one down the wing here and one over there. So this ship is not that big, but it got a very decent gun to ship size ratio. Not sure if there's an official ranking in terms of in terms of this particular indicator, but I think the ship should rank pretty highly there. And it's got like a really great amount of firepower because the guns below the wing are size 3, so you got 2 of those. Then the guns on the wingtips are size 1, so you also got 2 of those, which basically puts you at the exact same firepower as an arrow, depending on if you use the turret in the arrow or just use it fixed. And then on top of that, the gun at the top of the ship is size 4, which, as it turns out, is like basically one size 3 gun plus another size 1 gun. So effectively you have, you know, by some archaic magic called mathematics, you would basically end up with like 4.5 size 3 guns, basically. Which puts you even above the Saber in terms of firepower. And it really shows, I think. And it made the ship very interesting to fly. However, historically, the ship had quite a few issues. One of the reasons why it's pretty decent right now is there has recently been a switch back in the flight model and, most importantly, the weapon control systems that made fixed weapons way more viable, by basically giving fixed weapons a sort of miniature gimbal effect, where if you hit the target, where if your indicator is close enough to the target, the game automatically corrects and basically puts it closer to the target, and in the end you're probably gonna hit. So this helped the ship a lot, because the ship doesn't deal well with an old gimbal system, because the guns on the wingtips, okay, there's some special mounts that you can just transform them into gimbal size 1 weapons, but then you end up still losing a lot of firepower by converting all of your weapon slots into gimbal. And on top of that, during the same time where the whole gimbal meta was happening, we also had issues with the ship and shield holds, which have mostly been fixed now. So the ship's a lot better now than it was like a year ago, or even half a year ago, I think. So let's take it out for a spin and kill something. Maybe not an Idris. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, I already had a mission. Screwed myself. I already had a mission set up and just forgot about it. Too bad. Anyway, let's get over there. No, it's not that one. It's that one. Aside from the guns, the ship is also pretty maneuverable and has a pretty decent acceleration. Deceleration is not that great. It kind of leaves a lot of it kind of leaves things as what? Okay. Well, apparently game thought I should have a quantum intercept, but then decided to not spawn anything. No problem. Gah. Patience. What I was trying to say, the deceleration leaves a lot to be desired, but acceleration is pretty good. So if you use special maneuvers where you basically turn the entire ship around in order to decelerate, it's fine, but don't expect it to behave like an arrow, because it's not quite an arrow. But also the arrow doesn't quite have the same amount of firepower as this vehicle does. Like, basically you have 50% more firepower than an arrow, so I guess if it would also behave like an arrow, the arrow would kind of be very superfluous. So gladly that's not the case. Also, the ship is obviously quite a bit bigger, so it is a much easier target to hit. Something that's also not great about the ship is the wings. First, the wings are pretty massive because it doesn't just include the wings you can see on the outside. Here are the wings on the far right, but it also includes the massive engines that you can see next to the wings. And together, those kind of are big and easy target to hit, and it's pretty likely that a few enemies down this mission, we might be losing a wing, which kind of happens. You don't lose too much in terms of weaponry, because only the size 1 guns are mounted directly on the wings. However, the engines are mounted on the wings, so then you start losing engines, you start losing maneuverability, and at that point you probably want to go back to your to a ship repair shop of your choosing and get your wing reattached, because at that point it's not very fun. Actually, once I had lost both wings, and I think the ship was just basically floating and just operating with maneuvering thrusters. I still took down 2 more ships before finally getting destroyed by the remaining 2 or 3 ships or so. So it can fight back, but you know, losing the wings is a bit of an issue. Anyway, could you spawn in opposition maybe? Maybe we can do some acceleration. Has 8.7 G's acceleration and supposedly 3.6 deceleration. Here we had it a bit. Here we had more because we were using the entire ship to decelerate and the main engine thrust. So what do we have? Yeah, a hurricane. I haven't talked about the weapons loadout yet. I tried to keep it as close to the factory loadout as possible, but I also have tried others. I'll talk more about weapon loadouts later, I think. For now, let's just move on to the next target. Well, since nothing has appeared yet, should always be ready to immediately quantum jump out of these group war missions, because I'm kind of abusing a spawning bug here, because these ships that I'm killing shouldn't just spawn in all by themselves. They should have escorts, which, you know, would warrant bringing more people than just yourself. But since the escorts spawn later, and as you can see, the things don't spawn immediately but take a few seconds, you can often kill the target before the escorts have spawned. But that's basically the reason why as soon as you've put down your opponent, you want to get out. Don't think that's part of this mission. Let's actually finish up the mission, and then I can discuss some things, and then we can maybe continue with the rest of the targets later. Anyway, as we've seen, acceleration like about 9 Gs, which is fine. Deceleration 6 apparently this time. Wasn't it supposed to be 4? Strange. Strange. I think it shouldn't be 6, but I'll take 6. I think it's supposed to be 4 or something. Anyway, what do we got? Come on, Travis. In any event, let's talk about loadouts. The loadout that I'm using here now is 2 distortion guns in the size 3 slots, plus Gatling guns on the size 1 slots and the top mount, size 4 slot. The Gatling guns you already get with the default ship configuration, but I didn't like, you know, the mix of laser repeaters plus Gatling guns that the default configuration has. Because the distortion guns do serve one pretty interesting purpose, which is conserve ammo, because basically you can open up the fight just throwing the distortion guns at the enemy when you have not too great shot, just a very decent one, and then it can already take down shields from the enemy, and then after the shields have already been diminished, your Gatling guns will be hella more effective because they just have to pierce a small bit of the rest of a shield and not have to deal with the entire shield by themselves, which I think is a good way to conserve ammo. I basically don't like ballistic weapons very much because they force you to return to port in more frequently than you really have to. But I kind of like this loadout because, you know, if I want to conserve ammo, I can just let the distortion guns do their magic. And then once the enemy doesn't have shields, or maybe even partially disabled, because the distortion guns, once the shields are down, can actually hinder the enemy movement, or even shut down other systems, then, you know, easier. It's an even easier job for the Gatling guns to just rip through the enemy. You know, so that kind of sounds like a pretty decent idea in theory, and also I think it's also a pretty decent idea in practical terms. As attrition guns are the current meta, if you will, I've also tried a full attrition gun setup. We'll discuss more details about those setups later, because the attrition setup needs a few more modifications to the ship, because it's very energy intensive, so you need to swap out some things. But I've also done that. It also worked fine, but the problem with attritions is that you need to be really close to the enemy, like sub 1k meters. And while the ship is pretty maneuverable, it's not quite an arrow, so you don't really want to go into those knife fights, because some of the opposition that you can run into is also pretty dangerous on close range, like the hurricanes that can sometimes show up for these missions. And just a few random shots to some critical components can just very much mess you up. So, yeah, I kind of, you know, there's kind of the problem of you want to not be that close. Also, the ship is not that maneuverable, so you can't be that close because it's not as responsive as an arrow. So, yeah, I kind of... It was still fine. You could still tear through stuff. No doubt about that. But I kind of like this loadout a bit more. Except that the distortion guns are really bright because they're basically sitting right next to you. And it does kind of make me a bit uncomfortable to use them to use them for a long time, because it's very bright. And considering the issues Cyberpunk recently had with epilepsy warnings, I guess I should start this video with an epilepsy warning or something. I don't know. But it can be very disorienting. So I'm not sure if they might just be not in your wheelhouse just based on that very factor. Anyway, let's head to a location where no one can get the jump on us, also known as open space, and discuss the weapon loadouts a bit more that I already talked about quite a bit. Alright, let's move over to Urkel. Alright, as you can see here, this is your base Buccaneer that you get for just 1.4 million, which is actually not that much, I think. The basic loadout has a few issues. The shields are pretty bad, honestly. Like, civilian grade C is not particularly awesome. Like, you could get almost double the HP, and I think... what's the regeneration? 180? Okay. And almost double the regen for just a single FR66 shield. So, one of the first things you should do is swap out those for FR66. If you use two FR66, however, you might run into energy issues, because you're getting very dangerously close to a level where your power plant might just decide to go on a bit of a strike in moments where you really need it. So I actually alleviated that by just going with a stealth shield, because stealth shields don't really require that much power. And also their damage regen delay is slightly better than the FR66, but the FR66 is already pretty good with 3.85 seconds. But the Mirage just is at 2.14, so it's slightly better. The regeneration improves, but the shield pool doesn't improve much. But still, the mirages are still just a total upgrade compared to the webs that you start, because they have the same amount of power, but much higher regeneration and much faster damage region delay. So if you want to upgrade, just upgrade the shields, because there's a lot of potential there. Another thing that I upgraded immediately is the quantum drive. The default quantum drive is okay, but there is one that is much better, the Atlas. It's not faster, obviously, but it's very fuel. It's very good in terms of fuel requirements. And the ship has one problem, which is that it has very low fuel reserves. And so if you want to do jumps from planet to planet, you could probably do one with any drive. But if you want to do that more frequently and not have to refuel along the way, the Atlas is probably a pretty decent choice, because it doesn't require much fuel, and it still is pretty decent in terms of speed. Like, there's way slower drives that you can get than the Atlas. So I would also recommend that you upgrade that. If you really want, you could also think about getting something faster, but I think the Atlas is totally fine. Anyway, weapons. As you can see here, it already starts with 2 size 1 Gatling guns and the size 4 Gatling guns, which in the loadout I just demonstrated I just kept. And then I just exchanged the Panthers for Distortion Repeaters. As you can see, the Distortion Repeaters have an interesting property where they attack all shield facings at the same time. So once you got a few hits in, it doesn't really matter which shield facing you hit. With the Gatling guns, it's already down to some extent, and it can just proceed to pierce through it, or just directly damage the armor at some point. So I think those work pretty well together, and that's it. I mean, at this point you're dangerously getting close to the cooling max, but it's still fine. And power is a bit high, but it's still fine. So at that point you would be pretty well off, I think. And it doesn't cost quite as much. Like, if I add the non-stock items card here, we would see that even if you have nothing of these, even if you have none of these components beforehand, you could get all of them for just another 77k, which is not much, you know. So I think it's definitely worth investing on top of the 1.5 mil that you need to invest for the ship, unless you already have one. So then I also wanted to talk about the attrition setup. So let's switch that over to full attrition. Attrition, and sure, also attrition. Well, thanks to just having the Mirage, you don't run into energy energy issues yet, but you're getting dangerously close to a level where that might be an issue. So I would recommend, if you want to go for the full attrition loadout, to upgrade the power plant further, which can be done with industrial power plants. They even have slightly better power production than the military power plants. They have a slower power draw request time, so that means if suddenly your shield needs to start regenerating, it will take a moment for the power plant to react, unlike the military power plant, which only has like 10 seconds, so it's going to be a bit faster. But generally, since it can generate so much energy, that also kind of balances that out a little bit. And then if you really want to, you can also, of course, upgrade the coolers to something better. Like, also the best ones would be industrial coolers. And, well, that will be it. This is a bit pricier, because the Breton costs quite a bit. Let's actually empty that cart. And then non-stock. Here you would have to invest a little bit more, like 230k Alpha UEC, so that's a bit of a heavier investment, but if you want to try that out, it's pretty fun. And also the DPS is not quite correct, because you probably want to overclock them. And at that point you're looking pretty well if you can get close enough to the enemy, you know? That's kind of that's where your piloting skill has has to kind of match the fighting style that you're using. Apparently, I'm not that good at that particular fighting style. I can do it with the arrow, but the arrow like is super responsive, so probably doesn't matter too much there when you don't have any decent fighter pilot skill. But here, you probably need a bit more skill in order to use it properly. But I think it should be pretty awesome if you can master a ship like this, and you can just rip through shit. Anyway, that's all about that. I think we're about done here. Still alive here. I think I'm gonna go back to having some more missions in this fun little vessel. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.